Saturday, September 14th, at exactly 6:42 p.m. I was standing beneath a crystal chandelier in the grand ballroom of the Pfister Hotel in Milwaukee, holding a place card that told me exactly what my family thought of me. The cardstock was thick cream-colored, embossed in elegant calligraphy, like the other 200 cards, arranged on ivory linen. My name, Lauren Whitaker, was written in sweeping black ink. Beneath it, in smaller italics, was a second line no one else had. Non-priority. There are humiliations that happen in private. And then there are the kind that happen under chandeliers, with a string quartet playing and champagne glasses catching the light while 200 guests drift toward their assigned tables. My younger sister Natalie was getting married that evening. 29, radiant, marrying into the Harper family, old Milwaukee restaurant money, the kind that carries quiet influence. At the front of the room, a long table faced the dance floor. My parents, Thomas and Diane Whitaker, were already seated there beside Natalie and her new husband, Daniel Harper. 4 chairs. No fifth. I checked the seating chart once. Then again, table 16 was near the service doors. My name was printed there as well. Same elegant script, same quiet verdict. I became aware of how loud the room was. Laughter, silverware, the soft clink of wine glasses being poured at the family table. I glanced over just as a waiter uncorked a bottle of Reserve Cabernet and filled my mother's glass. In my left hand, I was still holding a small craft paper envelope. Inside was a certified check for $10,000, 8 months of skipped lunches, in my Chicago office, postponed vacations, and careful budgeting in my 1-bedroom apartment. It was meant to be my wedding gift to Natalie, my way of showing up in a family where I'd always been told to just don't make it about you. A woman I didn't recognize smiled politely at me from table 16. "How do you know the bride?" she asked. I looked back at the card in my hand. "I'm her sister," I said. She blinked, just once, then glanced toward the head table as if recalculating something. The word on that card wasn't decorative. It was structural. Someone had requested it, approved it, printed it. Non-priority. I stood there for another full minute, listening to the room continue without me. Then I walked, not quickly, not dramatically, across the ballroom, toward the long, draped gift table against the far wall. Silver boxes, gold envelopes, crystal bowls. I found my envelope easily. Plain, honest, like me. I opened it, slid out the check, folded it once, slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket. A few nearby guests noticed, a murmur barely audible over the music. From across the room, my mother caught my eye. Her smile faltered. I placed the empty envelope back on the table, and then I walked out of my sister's wedding reception, leaving behind a labeled seat at table 16 and taking my $10,000 with me. That was the moment everything shifted. 6 months before that Saturday night, in September, there was no place card, no label, no public humiliation under chandeliers. There was just me, sitting at my small kitchen table in Chicago on a Tuesday evening in March, staring at my banking app and doing math. I've worked as a financial analyst for a mid-sized logistics firm in the Loop for almost 9 years. It's steady work, predictable. Numbers make sense to me in ways people often don't. I know what comes in, what goes out, what can be adjusted, and what can't. When Natalie called to tell me she'd booked the Pfister for her wedding reception, I already knew what that meant. The Harper family didn't do anything halfway. Daniel Harper's parents owned 3 well-known supper clubs in southeastern Wisconsin. Their name carried weight in certain rooms. "I just want it to be elegant," Natalie had said over FaceTime, tilting the camera to show me a Pinterest board filled with ivory florals and gold accents. Timeless. She didn't ask me to be a bridesmaid. She didn't have to explain why. Her bridal party was her college roommates and 2 women from Daniel's extended circle. "I'm keeping it small," she'd said, smiling, in that careful way she has when she knows something might sting, but doesn't want to acknowledge it. I told her it was perfect. That night in March, I opened a separate savings spreadsheet and created a new column wedding gift. My initial thought had been $5,000. Generous, respectable. Then I had changed it to 10. 10,000 felt decisive. It felt like something no one could dismiss. Not flashy, not performative, just solid, adult, supportive. I cut my weekday lunches down to leftovers, canceled the weekend trip I'd been considering with a friend to Napa, let my gym membership lapse, and started walking along the lake instead. I wasn't suffering. I was reallocating. That's what you call it when you work in finance. Mom Diane would occasionally text updates about the venue tasting or the florist. Natalie has such vision, she'd write. You'd be so proud of her. I was proud of her. I just wasn't included. When invitations went out in June, mine arrived in the mail like everyone else's. Thick ivory envelope, gold script, no handwritten note tucked inside, no separate card, just the formal invite. Dad Thomas called a week later to make sure I'd received it. His voice, as always, even and careful. Big day for your sister, he said. We're looking forward to having everyone together. Everyone together. By mid-August, the savings column read $10,000 exactly. I requested a certified check from my bank branch on Wacker Drive the following Friday. The teller congratulated me when I mentioned it was for my sister's wedding. That's very generous, she said. I smiled. She's my only sister. I slid the check into a plain craft paper envelope the night before I drove up to Milwaukee. I didn't write the amount in the card. I didn't need to. The gesture would speak for itself. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back now, I can see that I wasn't trying to buy a seat at a table. I was trying to prove I deserved one. The first time I understood that love in our house came with categories. I was 12 years old and standing in the kitchen holding a stack of paper plates. It was Thanksgiving, not the wedding, not the ballroom, just our split-level home in Brookfield, Wisconsin, with folding tables set up in the dining room and my mother's best china arranged like a magazine spread. Dad carved the turkey at the head of the table. Natalie, 8 years old and already magnetic, was telling a story about a spelling bee she'd won. Everyone laughed at the right moments. I was in the doorway, waiting for a pause long enough to ask where Mom wanted the extra gravy. There wasn't one. Over the years, it became a pattern so subtle it could be mistaken for coincidence. Christmas mornings, Natalie opened her gifts first. She's the baby, Mom would say, smiling at me as if that explained everything. My gifts came later, usually practical. A coat, a planner, something useful. At family barbecues, Dad would introduce Natalie to neighbors with pride in his voice. That's my youngest, marketing whiz. When it was my turn, it was simpler. Lauren works in Chicago. No elaboration, no adjectives. I never thought of it as favoritism. Not out loud. Families aren't spreadsheets. You don't tally attention and divide it evenly. That's what I told myself. But there were small things that lingered. The framed photographs in our living room were arranged chronologically along the wall near the staircase. Natalie's high school homecoming photo sat in a silver frame, centered. My college graduation picture, taken in Navy robes outside Northwestern Stadium, was placed on a side table beneath a lamp. Not hidden, just not featured. Mom once moved it to dust and never quite put it back where it had been. I noticed. I didn't say anything. Last Easter, 5 months before the wedding, I arrived early to help set the table. Natalie came in late, sunlit and laughing, carrying a dessert she'd bought from a bakery downtown. Mom took it from her like it was a trophy. You always know how to make things look special, she said. I had been there since 9 that morning, peeling potatoes. It wasn't cruelty. That's what made it complicated. It was preference, expressed in tones and glances, in who got asked for opinions and who got handed a task. When the wedding planning started in earnest, I offered to help. I meant it. I asked Natalie if she needed spreadsheets, vendor comparisons, budget tracking. Things I was good at. "We've got it covered," she said lightly. "Daniel's mom has someone handling details." Daniel's mom, Margaret Harper. I hadn't met her yet. The first small crack appeared in July when Mom accidentally left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while I was refilling lemonade. A seating chart draft was pulled up on the screen. Round tables numbered. Names arranged in neat rows. I wasn't at the head table. That made sense. Only immediate family and the bridal party usually sat there. But I wasn't at table 2 either, or table 3. I was listed at table 16. I stared at it for maybe 3 seconds, long enough to feel something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not yet, just recognition. Mom came back into the room, saw where I was looking, and angled the screen slightly closed. "It's not final," she said quickly. "Don't overthink it." I nodded. That was the family motto. Don't overthink it. But that night, driving back to Chicago, I found myself doing exactly that. Because in our house, nothing was random. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether I'd been assigned a place long before that ballroom ever printed it. By 7:15 p.m., dinner service had begun, and the differences were no longer subtle. From table 16 near the double doors that swung open every few minutes to reveal stainless steel counters and waitstaff moving in practice lines, I had a clear view of the head table. The chandeliers cast a warm glow over ivory linens and crystal stemware. A sommelier in a black vest leaned in toward my parents and poured a deep red Cabernet into wide, bold glasses. At our table, a young server with a nervous smile set down water glasses and moved on without mentioning wine. I told myself it didn't matter. It was a wedding, a large one. Logistics happen. But when the first course arrived, the pattern sharpened. At the head table, white plates were placed carefully before my parents, Natalie and Daniel. Seared scallops over a bed of risotto, finished with something green and delicate that looked like microgreens. Applause drifted lightly from that end of the room as someone made a joke. At table 16, we received salad. Mixed greens with bottled vinaigrette. No explanation, no flourish. The woman seated across from me, the same one who had asked how I knew, the bride, leaned forward slightly. She was in her late 60s, pearls resting neatly at her collarbone. "Oh," she said, glancing toward the front of the room. "Are they doing a different menu up there?" I followed her gaze. The main course was already being plated at the head table. Filet mignon. I could see it clearly when Daniel cut into his juices, catching the candlelight. At our table-covered dishes were set down without ceremony. Chicken breast. No sauce. No wine pairing. I didn't feel angry. I felt measured, as if someone had taken the time to calibrate this. I glanced again toward the head table. My mother was leaning toward Natalie, laughing at something Daniel's father had said. My father sat upright, composed, his posture formal as always. From this distance, the table looked seamless, unified. There were 4 of them. At table 16, the service doors pushed open again. A tray nearly clipped the back of my chair. I shifted slightly, folding my napkin tighter in my lap. The room hummed with speeches and clinking silverware. A toast began at the front. Applause rippled through the ballroom. I clapped when everyone else did. No one looked toward the back of the room. Not once did Natalie's eyes scan past the first 5 rows of tables. I touched the inside pocket of my jacket, feeling the crisp edge of the certified check. $10,000. 8 months of quiet, rearranging my life. The woman across from me smiled kindly. "Weddings can be so complicated," she said softly, as if offering comfort. I nodded. Complicated suggested confusion. This didn't feel confused. It felt organized. I took a slow sip of water and let my eyes move across the ballroom one more time. The ivory at the front, the polyester sheen beneath my own plate. The physical distance between table 1 and table 16 was maybe 40 feet. It felt like miles. When the applause rose again, another toast, another laugh. I understood something clearly for the first time that evening. The place card hadn't been symbolic. It had been logistical, and logistics in my family were rarely accidental. Sunday morning, September 15th. I woke up in my Chicago apartment to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then, I saw the plain, craft paper envelope on my kitchen counter and the folded, certified check resting beside it. The reception hadn't been a dream. I reached for my phone. 32 unread messages. 11 missed calls. The first text was from my mother, sent at 11:48 p.m. "How could you do this to your sister?" Another followed 3 minutes later. "You humiliated us in front of everyone." Garrett didn't exist in my life. I didn't have a brother to mediate or smooth things over. There was no buffer, just my parents and Natalie. My father had left a voicemail at 6:12 a.m. His voice was steady, almost formal. "Lauren, we need to handle this privately. Call your mother. Handle this." Natalie hadn't texted me directly. Instead, at 1:03 a.m., she'd posted an Instagram story. A slow-motion clip of her and Daniel on the dance floor, twirling under soft lights. The caption read, "Nothing could ruin this perfect night." I watched it twice. Then I noticed something else. In the corner of the video, for half a second, the gift table was visible, the place where my envelope had been. The caption didn't mention me. It didn't have to. The narrative was already forming. By 8:30 a.m., an aunt I hadn't spoken to in months texted, "I heard you caused a scene. I hope you're okay." Caused a scene. I sat at my small kitchen table with the check in front of me and tried to replay the night as if it were a deposition. Had I raised my voice? No. Had I confronted Natalie publicly? No. I had walked to a table, opened an envelope, taken back my own money, left. The facts were simple, but perception was louder than facts. My mother called again at 9:02 a.m. I let it ring. A minute later, a text appeared. "It was just a seating chart, Lauren. You overreacted. Just a seating chart." The words felt familiar. Like, "Don't overthink it." Like she's the baby. Like every quiet adjustment I had made for 33 years. My chest tightened, not with anger this time, but with clarity. It wasn't about the chicken instead of filet, or the wine, or even the place card. It was about being told, once again, that what I experienced wasn't real. That the difference I could see with my own eyes was somehow imaginary. I picked up the certified check and held it between my fingers. $10,000. 8 months of rearranging my life. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a family number. "Hi, Lauren. This is Elise Monroe, the wedding coordinator from last night. I'm sorry to reach out directly. I think you deserve to see something." I stared at the message for a long time. The noise from my family texts, calls, accusations felt heavy and urgent. Elise's message felt different, measured, intentional. I didn't respond right away. I set the phone down, poured myself coffee, and stood by the window overlooking the street below. Sunday traffic was light, ordinary, calm. Inside, something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't wondering whether I had overreacted. I was wondering who had decided I would stay quiet, and whether I was finally done doing that. Tuesday, September 17th, at 5:40 p.m., I walked into a cafe in Evanston with a manila folder tucked inside my tote bag, even though it was still empty. Elise Monroe was already seated near the window. I recognized her immediately from the reception, mid-30s, composed the kind of woman who moves through high-pressure rooms without raising her voice. At the wedding, she had worn a headset and a neutral expression. Today, she wore jeans and a navy sweater, and she looked uneasy. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure I would," I replied. And that was the truth. For 2 days, my phone had been a steady drip of accusation. My mother insisting it was a misunderstanding. My father urging me to let it go. Natalie silent, except for curated social media perfection. Elise turned her laptop toward me. "I want to be clear," she began. "This isn't something I normally share. But what happened Saturday wasn't a mix-up." The first email was dated 3 weeks before the wedding. From Natalie Whitaker. Subject: seating and packages. My eyes scanned the lines. My sister Lauren is on the guest list, but she's not priority. Please seat her at the back. Non-priority package. Reduced menu. No wine pairing. The words were precise, not emotional, operational. Elise clicked to the next message. Her own reply, just confirming this is the bride's sister. Immediate family is typically seated at table 1. Natalie's response followed less than an hour later. I know what I want. She's a courtesy invite. Handle it. The cafe noise seemed to dim around me. Courtesy invite. There it was again. The language of categorization, of ranking. I pushed back, Elise said quietly. More than once. Your mother was looped in. She opened another thread. A forwarded text exchange. Diane Whitaker, don't worry about Lauren. She'll sit there quietly. She always does. There was no sarcasm, no emoji, just a statement of fact. I felt something settle inside me. Not shock, not even anger. Confirmation. For days, I had been told I misunderstood, that I overreacted, that I embarrassed the family over something trivial. There was nothing trivial about a contracted menu downgrade, nothing accidental about a labeled package. I shouldn't be showing you this, Elise said. But I've done weddings for 12 years. I've seen family tension. This was intentional. I nodded slowly. Across the cafe, a couple laughed over coffee. A barista called out a name. Ordinary life continued. My life, however, had just shifted from suspicion to evidence. I asked Elise to forward the emails to me. She hesitated only briefly before typing. By the time I left, 3 documents sat in my inbox. I stopped at a copy shop on the drive back into the city and printed them. Crisp white paper, black ink, hard proof. At home, I slid the pages into a manila folder and placed it beside the certified check on my kitchen table. For the first time since Saturday, I wasn't replaying the ballroom in my mind. I was thinking about a brunch table in Brookfield, about my mother's dining room, my father's silence, Natalie's polished explanations. They believed I had walked out impulsively. They believed I would eventually apologize. What they didn't know was that I now had something they hadn't planned for. Receipts, and I wasn't planning to stay quiet this time. Sunday, September 22nd at 10:03 a.m. I walked into my parents' dining room in Brookfield with the manila folder tucked under my arm. My mother had set the table as if presentation alone could steady the room. White china, linen napkins, a crystal pitcher of orange juice catching the morning light. My father sat at the head of the table, newspaper folded beside his plate. Natalie and Daniel were already seated across from each other. No one mentioned the wedding. Thank you for coming, my mother said, her tone carefully bright. Let's put this behind us. Behind us. I took my seat, placing my tote on the floor beside my chair. The folder rested on my lap. Daniel looked tired. Not angry, just unsettled. I'm sorry things got awkward, he said gently. The seating mix-up shouldn't have happened. There it was again. Mix-up. Natalie nodded quickly. Exactly. The planner messed up the categories. It wasn't personal. I looked at her for a long moment. She held my gaze steady, practiced. Whose idea was the non-priority package? I asked. The air shifted. My father's eyes lifted from his plate. My mother's hand paused halfway to her coffee cup. That's not how it was labeled, Natalie said immediately. It was just a seating tier. Everyone does that for large weddings. I didn't respond. I reached into my tote, removed the manila folder, and placed it flat on the table between the salt shaker and the butter dish. The sound of paper sliding against polished wood was louder than it should have been. I opened the folder and laid out 3 printed pages. Email 1. Email 2. The forwarded text. Daniel leaned forward first. He read silently, then again slower. His jaw tightened slightly as he reached the line that read, "She's a courtesy invite. Handle it." That's taken out of context, Natalie said quickly. You don't understand the pressure I was under. My mother's voice cut in sharper now. Lauren, this is inappropriate. Sharing private communications. They were shared with me, I said calmly. By the person you hired. Silence stretched across the table. My father picked up the 3rd page. The text from my mother. He read it once, then placed it back down carefully. "She'll sit there quietly," he repeated under his breath. Mom inhaled sharply. That was a figure of speech. Daniel looked up at Natalie. "You told me it was a seating glitch." "It was," she insisted. The planner misunderstood. "She confirmed it," I said quietly, tapping the email thread. For the first time since I'd arrived, Natalie's composure cracked. Not dramatically, just enough. A flicker. "You had no right to take back that check," she said, her voice tightening. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone." There it was. The pivot. Not denial. Reframing. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. "Was it intentional?" he asked her. "Not me." Natalie didn't answer right away. My mother stood abruptly. "This family does not air its grievances like this," she said. "We handle things privately." "I am handling it privately," I replied. Right now, the room felt smaller than it had when I walked in. Daniel rose from his chair. "I need some air," he said quietly, and walked toward the back door. The screen door shut with a sharp click. Natalie stared at the papers, as if they might rearrange themselves into something harmless. My father remained seated, his hands folded, eyes no longer avoiding mine. Nothing was resolved. Nothing was repaired, but the narrative had fractured. And for the first time, it wasn't just my word against theirs. By Wednesday, September 25th, the silence had changed shape. It wasn't loud, like the Sunday morning accusations. It was quieter, strategic. My mother had stopped calling. Natalie hadn't texted at all. Even my father's usual steady check-ins had gone still. Instead, the ripple moved sideways. I first heard from Margaret Harper, Daniel's mother, at 4:17 p.m., while I was finishing a quarterly forecast at my desk in Chicago. Her voice when I answered was calm, in a way that carried weight. "Lauren," she said, "I'd like to clarify something." We had met briefly at the rehearsal dinner, exchanged polite smiles across linen and candlelight. She was a composed woman in her early 60s, silver hair, perfectly set, the kind of presence that fills a room without raising its volume. "I've seen the emails," she continued. I didn't ask how. Daniel must have shown her. There was a pause, long enough for both of us to understand what that meant. "In our family," she said carefully, "we value directness. If there was a decision made, it should have been owned." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't support either. It was assessment. An assessment, in business families, like the Harpers, carries consequences. That same afternoon, Natalie's name surfaced in a different context. A colleague of mine, who consults occasionally with regional restaurant groups, mentioned casually that the Harper marketing team had postponed a seasonal campaign launch. "Internal review," he said. "Budget discrepancies, maybe." Natalie worked in marketing for one of Daniel's family companies. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. But I understood how reputation moves in a city like Milwaukee. Quietly, efficiently. Word doesn't explode. It settles. By Friday, September 27th, my mother's narrative shifted. Instead of insisting it was a misunderstanding, she texted, "You've created unnecessary tension between families." Between families. The scope had widened. Daniel called that evening. "I didn't know," he said. No preamble, no defense. About the package. I believed him. "But you walked out," he added. And there it was, the shared discomfort. Now it's complicated. Complicated. That word again. Was it complicated before I asked? He didn't answer directly. Mom's asking questions. About transparency. Transparency. Not about seating charts. About integrity. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with the manila folder open in front of me. Up until now, my instinct had been exposure. Lay the truth down and let it speak. But watching how quickly the Harper side moved from social embarrassment to operational concern, I realized something. This wasn't just about humiliation. It was about credibility. If Natalie had misrepresented something as straightforward as her own sister's status, what else might she misrepresent? That question didn't need my voice attached to it. It only needed oxygen. For the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel cornered. I felt positioned. The folder remained on my table, the certified check still beside it. I had no intention of sending it back, but I also had no intention of escalating recklessly. Reputation in families like ours isn't destroyed in one dramatic moment. It shifts in increments, and I was beginning to understand exactly where the leverage lived. Monday, September 30th, at 8:12 a.m., Natalie's name appeared in a context she couldn't curate. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. Margaret Harper had scheduled what was described as a strategic alignment meeting at Harper Hospitality's Milwaukee headquarters. Daniel called me at 7:40 a.m., his voice low-controlled. "She's being asked to explain discrepancies," he said. "Not about money, about communication." Communication. The word sounded clinical, harmless. It wasn't. Harper Hospitality wasn't a small operation. Regional restaurants, boutique event spaces, seasonal campaigns, brand integrity was currency. And in families like the Harpers, internal trust ranked higher than profit margins. Daniel didn't defend her this time. They printed the emails he added quietly. I glanced at the manila folder, still sitting on my kitchen counter in Chicago. My copies hadn't moved. "I didn't send anything else," I said. "I know," he replied, which meant the source wasn't me. By 10:15 a.m., my mother was calling again. This time, her tone had changed. "You've gone too far," she said, without greeting. Daniel's mother is questioning Natalie's professionalism. "She should," I answered calmly. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. This is her career. And there it was, the stake made explicit. For weeks, the conversation had circled around feelings, embarrassment, optics. Now, it was about employment, reputation, stability. I closed my eyes briefly and pictured the head table again. The filet mignon, the calibrated menu tiers, the line that read, "She's a courtesy invite. Handle it." No one had worried about my professional dignity when they assigned me a downgraded package. No one had asked whether public humiliation might ripple into my own life. I didn't fabricate anything. I said, I didn't exaggerate. I didn't raise my voice. I presented facts. "You blindsided your sister," my mother insisted. "No," I replied. "She blindsided herself." Silence followed. By early afternoon, Daniel texted. "They're restructuring her role temporarily. Review period. Review period. Corporate language for consequence." Natalie called me at 2:47 p.m. Her voice when I answered was tight but not tearful. "Are you satisfied?" she asked. I leaned against my kitchen counter, staring at the skyline beyond my window. "This isn't about satisfaction," I said. "You could have kept it between us." "I tried," I replied. "At brunch," she exhaled sharply. "You've made me look dishonest." I didn't soften my tone. "I didn't make you anything." Another silence, heavier this time. "I needed the day to be perfect," she said finally. "You always complicate things." The old script. I let it hang there. "I didn't complicate it," I said quietly. I declined to play along. When we hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Karma, I realized, rarely arrives as a dramatic collapse. It arrives as scrutiny, as review, as trust, quietly withdrawn. By evening, my father sent a short message. "We need to talk about boundaries. Not about forgiveness, not about reconciliation. Boundaries." The stakes had reached their peak. Natalie's credibility was under formal review. The Harper family was reassessing internal trust. My own relationship with my parents was fracturing in real time. And yet, despite the tremor running beneath everything, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not joy, clarity. For the first time in my life, the hierarchy had consequences, and they weren't mine to carry anymore. Thursday, October 10th, the final decision became official. Daniel called just after noon. "It's done," he said. His voice wasn't angry this time. It wasn't defensive either. It was measured. "Natalie's been removed from campaign oversight. She'll stay with the company, but not in a leadership role. There's a formal note in her file." A formal note. In corporate families, that's a scar that doesn't fade easily. I closed my laptop and let the words settle. This wasn't a firing. It wasn't dramatic. There were no slammed doors or public statements. It was accountability. She told them it was wedding stress, Daniel added quietly. But the board didn't focus on the wedding. They focused on judgment. Judgment. That was the word that mattered. After we hung up, my phone remained still. No immediate backlash. No frantic calls. At 3:22 p.m., my father texted, "We accept that this went too far. Your mother and I misjudged the situation." It wasn't an apology in flowing language. It wasn't emotional. But it was the first time in my life that we did not automatically mean you should have tolerated it. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked down to the bank branch on the corner of my street in Chicago. It was a clear fall afternoon, leaves catching in the gutters, the air sharp but steady. I endorsed the certified check and deposited it into my account. The teller, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stamped the receipt and slid it back to me. "Have a good day," she said. Simple, ordinary, final. The $10,000 no longer represented a wedding gift. It represented reclaimed agency. That evening, I received one last message from Natalie. It wasn't long. I didn't think it would go this far. For a moment, I studied the words. No accusation, no reframing, no defense, just recognition of scale. I typed back carefully. It didn't have to. And I meant it, because the truth was, none of this had been about a seating chart. It had been about a pattern, about being placed, labeled, managed, about the assumption that I would sit quietly wherever assigned. Sunday, October 13th. I hosted dinner at my apartment. Not a formal dinner. No linen, no tears. Just a wooden table. I'd refinished myself, 3 close friends from work. A bottle of wine I chose, and a meal I cooked without hierarchy. We sat wherever we wanted. Conversation flowed without calibration. There was no head of the table. As I cleared the dishes later that night, I realized something unexpected. Justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like balance restored. Natalie would rebuild. My parents would adjust. The Harper family would recalibrate. And I would no longer accept a seat assigned in silence. The hierarchy hadn't vanished, but it had consequences now. And I had boundaries. If you've ever been told to just let it go, to keep the peace, I'd love to hear your story. Share your thoughts about family fairness and healing. And if this resonated, stay with me for the next story. Sometimes the quietest shifts create the strongest foundations.